Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. My name is Lou Perez. If you'd like to support my work, please head over to thelouperez.locals.com and join the Lou Perez community. You'll get to listen to my podcasts and watch my sketch comedy videos before I release them to the rest of the world. And you'll also have access to exclusive content for members only. And if you're looking for another way you can support me, you can do so by supporting my sponsors. Black Organic Cold Brew. Just head over to www.blvckbrew.com and use promo code LOU for free shipping. And if you're into CBD products, please check out Paloma Verde CBD. Head over to palomaverdecbd.com and use promo code LOU for 25% off purchases over $75. All right, here we go. I am joined tonight by Mark Crispin Miller, a professor from NYU. And this is a treat for me because I was telling Mark earlier, this is the first time I'm broadcasting from my new home in New Jersey, in the suburbs of New Jersey. So I've become an adult. But the fact that Mark is a professor at my alma mater kind of brings me back in time to my NYU years. So Mark, thank you for making this happen.
Well, thank you for making it happen. Let me ask, when were you at NYU?
I was class of 04. So I was there from 2000 to 2004. Were you there at the time? Was there any overlap?
We didn't cross paths. I got here in 97.
Oh, okay. I started out in the College of Arts and Science, and then I transferred to Gallatin. So I became a Gallatin person. So.
Wow. Well, some of my best students have been Gallatin students. On the other hand, the student who started this whole ordeal that we're going to talk about tonight,
yeah,
is also a Gallatin student.
Oh man!
So you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah. Well, I guess before we get into that, maybe we could talk a little bit about how you became a professor, how you became a teacher. What brought you down that path in life?
Well, that's an interesting question because, I never really wanted to be a professor when I was a kid. I was interested in music, film, theater, stuff like that. And after I graduated, I just went to grad school in English. It was a kind of an inertia. I was very good at English, close readings of literary texts and stuff like that. And I got a good deal at Johns Hopkins, full tuition and a stipend and all that. So I figured I would do that. But I always thought that I would take my degree and go do something else. But you know how things are. You get into the groove, and I did. But this is significant. It's part of the answer to your question. I never really felt entirely at home in the academy. And indeed, even as I was still in graduate school, I would write articles for magazines with, a wide readership. I wrote for The Nation, I wrote for The New Republic, I wrote for the New York Review of Books. I have a total of one academic publication on my whole bibliography. It was a piece in Milton Studies, which is a hardcover that, would come out once a year. I suppose it still exists. But I was, increasingly interested in film, although my dissertation was on Shakespeare. And I taught some film courses as a grad student at Hopkins, and I ran the film series on campus and started writing articles about film, and realized that you could get a tremendous amount out of a movie, a great movie, by reading it very closely, by reading the images in a way very much like the way I had learned to read poems and plays, Mm-hmm. So from there, I started to notice that TV commercials in their own way were also extremely subtle, although not deep. They only make a very simple point, which is buy this, or this will make you powerful. But they did that in ways that were really remarkable when you started to dig deep into the images. So to make a long story short, by the end of the 70s, I was writing more and more about the media. And I was at a crossroads in the early 80s when I was offered a job at Berkeley. in the English department, and I'd always wanted to teach there. You know, I loved Berkeley. It's just a beautiful place. But they made very clear to me that while they liked the stuff I was writing for magazines on film and media, I couldn't get tenure just doing that. You know, I'd have to, you know, knuckle down and turn out academic articles on literature, which, you know, I didn't hate that idea. I just wasn't really interested in doing that then. So at the same time, back at Johns Hopkins, where I got my English PhD, the head of the creative writing department offered me a job, and he said, "Well, just call it nonfiction, and you can teach whatever you want." So I came back to Hopkins and taught writing, you know, with a focus on media. And from there, just became, you know, more and more renowned as a media critic. I suppose I should then tell you what happened to me in 2005, because it relates to my story about NYU.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, well, I by then, you know, I'd written 4 or 5 op-eds for the New York Times. I was often on NPR. So even though I was regarded as having kind of an edge, you know, to my media criticism, I was an acceptable figure. You know, I was acceptable in polite society. So I wrote a book about Bush. In 2001, it came out. It's called the Bush Dyslexicon, and it was a really careful reading of his speech, because, you know, there was a book called Bushisms that just made fun of his grammatical mistakes, but I noticed a pattern in his mistakes, that he only made these ridiculous mistakes when he was trying to profess a feeling that he didn't really feel, when he was trying more specifically to sound an idealistic note, talking about peace or education or economic justice. When he tried to do that, he would say hilariously screwed up things like, I know how hard it is for you to put food on your family. You know, he'd say things like that. But when he talked about war, when he talked about politics, when he talked about baseball, he was perfectly lucid, perfectly articulate. So it wasn't just that he was this dumbbell, you know, it was that he just couldn't really lie well enough, to, you know, to make it stick. So I wrote a whole book about that. And it was doing quite well until 9/11. And then suddenly he was exalted from, you know, being Bozo the Clown to being Winston Churchill. You may remember this.
Yeah.
And you couldn't criticize him anymore. So I then wrote another book about that administration. But in 2005, I came out with my book Fooled Again, which is a close investigation of the theft of the 2004 election, okay? You know, through electronic means and other tricks used, same tricks that were played in this last election, as a matter of fact. The book came out, big publisher in New York. We all expected it would make a splash. I was really excited because I thought this book is going to start a national conversation on the urgent need for a decent voting system in this country, because we actually have the worst voting system in the developed world. You know, it's a disgrace. It's so bad that we can never be confident that the result of an election has anything to do with the will of the electorate. I mean, that's how bad it is. But instead of making that kind of really beneficial splash, what happened was very strange. The corporate media blacked it out pretty much completely. The Times, the Washington Post, all of them. NPR would not have me on to talk about it. I got a total of 2 newspaper reviews in the whole country. One of them was a hit piece. But the strangest part about it, and the thing that got me thinking in a whole new way, was that while the corporate media blacked my book out, the left press attacked it as conspiracy theory. And they called me a conspiracy theorist. And these are magazines, Lou, that I'd written for. You know, some of the people attacking me were sort of friends of mine. It was the damnedest thing. And, you know, when I got over the shock, I mean, I went on a book tour and I got a lot of local press wherever I went, because people are very interested in this. But the media, no. And the left press, no, double no, right? So this was kind of an eye-opening experience in a profound way, because I asked myself, where did that come from? You know, when did that become a thing conspiracy theory? When did people start saying, as you may have said, I've said, everybody has said at one time or another, well, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but people say that. Then they'll come out with something perfectly reasonable.
I've said that. I've said that multiple times on this podcast. I'm saying, like, I've said, look, I don't go into conspiracy theories, but I mean, exactly like you said. And also, the reality is that conspiracies do happen.
Of course.
People do, that there are, for the most part, we of course we have lone wolves, but when big stuff happens, chances are there were more than one or two guys involved in it.
Yeah. And well, you're in for a treat, Luke. I'm going to tell you why it is. You and everybody else says this now. Okay.
Yeah, hit me with it.
Well, I was really mystified because I couldn't believe this has always been the case, right? So what I did was very simple. I went to the New York Times archive and the Washington Post and Time magazine. And I did a search on the two phrases conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist. And I discovered that conspiracy theory had been used occasionally until 1967. Conspiracy theorist was never used, okay? Conspiracy theory would come up now and then in no consistent way and only occasionally. But in 67, you start seeing it more and more. And as the years go by, you're really seeing it a lot. And after 9/11, it's countless, right? And by now it's in everybody's head. So, what was the reason for this? Well, it turns out that in early 1967, there was a lot of interest in the Kennedy assassination. This is 4 years later. And it was primarily because one book in particular was a bestseller. It's called Rush to Judgment by Mark Lane. But there were other books too that were getting traction, that were questioning the Warren Report. You mentioned lone wolves. The Warren Report is a joke. The whole scenario that it lays out is completely ridiculous. And all the documents, that are appended to the Warren Report basically disprove the story. I mean, it was just that they didn't even read the evidence. They just wanted to get that story out there, that Lee Harvey Oswald did it all by himself. There was no conspiracy. So people like Mark Lane start to question that, and the CIA regarded this as a problem. So they sent out a memo. The number is 1035-960, that memo, in I think the spring of 1967, and it went to all their station chiefs worldwide. It's been declassified. You can find it online. And it basically says, this is our problem. People are questioning the Warren Report. So this is what we're going to do. You're going to have your media assets write pieces that discredit the work of these conspiracy theorists in making one or more of these 5 arguments. And they list them. One is that conspiracy theory is connected to the communists, to the Kremlin. Another is the people doing this are just greedy, trying to make money. And another one that's really stuck, because we still hear it to this day, well, if there were a conspiracy of this magnitude, somebody would have talked by now and it would have been reported. Okay, we still hear this today. Mm-hmm. So that went out, and I would say that drive was among the most successful propaganda drives in history, because it has really changed the way Americans think of power. Now, let me tell your audience, at the same time I discovered this, a friend of mine whom I knew from the fight over election reform had made the discovery independently, a guy named Lance deHaven-Smith, who taught at Florida Atlantic University. He wrote an essay on this, which I read, and I was editing a series of books for the University of Texas Press. And I contacted him and I asked him to write a book on this, on the history of how that phrase came to be. And he wrote a fabulous book that everybody should read. It's called Conspiracy Theory in America, okay? And it tells this whole story of how and why the CIA did what it did, and more importantly, what it's done to the way we Americans think about power. the way we think about elites, he makes the very important point that Americans were never shy about expressing their suspicions of elite intentions. I mean, the Declaration of Independence is a conspiracy theory from beginning to end. That's what it is. Lists all these things the king did. He didn't do all of them, but it is conspiracy theory. Today it would be dismissed as conspiracy theory, you know. Mm-hmm. And he goes through, you know, quickly goes through American history, the Jacksonian era, the 19th century, the early 20th century. There just wasn't this embarrassment we feel when we suspect the elites of being up to no good. But as you note, conspiracy is just an agreement. Conspiracies are commonplace. Big business is just a big conspiracy. We don't have any trouble imagining that the mafia conspires, that organized crime conspires, but secret government agencies also conspire, okay? Elite interests, the more powerful and the more wealthy they become, the more conspiratorial they become, because their interests more and more clash with the interests of the people generally. So
yeah, Mark, can I just stop you there just for a sec?
Yeah, sure.
What you've been saying the whole time you've been saying it, and I've been listening, I've been taking it in, and no doubt I have been trained, because in my mind, part of my mind is saying like, oh, Mark is sounding like a conspiracy theorist. Like that's what part in my, like you're explaining this, you're laying it out, and then in my head I'm like, oh, JFK, here we go again. Just, you know, here we go. Got to read this book. You got to read that book. And it's interesting because you are, I mean, in a sense, you're saying, yeah, Lou, you've kind of been trained, you know, to think this way. You know?
Well, we all have been. I mean, I'm not pretending I've been immune to this, you know. I mean, look, I study propaganda. That's kind of my field. Okay, so I'm digging into stuff in a way most people don't have time to do, and they don't, and they're not encouraged to do it. Now, you know, if in the schools we were taught American history more honestly than we've been taught it, if we knew the history of the CIA, for example, if we knew the kinds of things they've been doing since they were formed in 1947, if we knew about, you know, certain government or business conspiracies prior to that moment, you know, if it wasn't all whited out in our textbooks and our teachers were honest about it, we wouldn't be as nervous hearing this kind of discussion as we tend to be. And the media makes it much, much worse. You know, the media now is completely unreliable, completely untrustworthy. It's just spouting propaganda all the time to an extent I never thought possible. I mean, I'm really staggered by how false the reporting is on a daily basis. And they certainly won't tell you the truth about any of these matters. And they are very quick to ridicule people like me and many others. And if, you know, you notice now, I mean, we're talking about this at a very scary moment for this kind of inquiry. Let me say first that if you can't question official narratives, you're living in a totalitarian society. That is, if you can't question what the government says, if you can't question what the state government says, if you can't question what the experts in the media say, you might as well be living in China, seriously. I mean, it is as American as apple pie to question authority. And if we're not allowed to do that, we're not a free people. There's no hope of progress, and there's no hope of scientific progress, you know. Now, what's happening at the moment is that this decades-old drive to marginalize and ridicule and tarnish conspiracy theory has evolved to the point where, since the last election in particular, and the so-called attempted coup on January 6th, we have government agencies explicitly linking what they call conspiracy theory with domestic terrorism. That's extremely dangerous, you know. Now, I've written books attacking Bush, Cheney. Most of my work on election theft focus on Republican election thefts. I am completely independent. I believe in certain principles. I believe in free and fair elections. I believe in electoral democracy. I believe in free speech. I believe in freedom of religion, all that, okay? And I have to say to you that I've never been as scared of the government as I am now, okay? It is now practically an arrestable offense to talk about the evidence that this last election was stolen. As far as I'm concerned, the evidence is overwhelming. And I can't really stand Trump. I never trusted him. I was arguing the last 4 years with people who thought he was in there trying to do the right thing. I never believed that. But the fact is, he actually won this time. And I, see exactly the same kind of evidence we studied, 16 years ago. And a lot of my old allies in the election integrity movement won't even look at that evidence because they hate Trump so much. My view is it's not their call who won the election. It's not up to them, right? It's supposed to be up to us. So, these are topsy-turvy times. These are weird times we're living in, and I guess my ordeal in NYU is all part of that when we get to it.
Yeah. On the election, this is definitely a subject that I haven't delved into very much. When you talk about, evidence of, the election being stolen, like what are, some of the things that the big things that pop in your head?
Well, the first thing that happened, and this is very similar to previous stolen elections, was that I think it was both, I think it was Ohio and Pennsylvania, and then Michigan and Pennsylvania, late at night, there was this sudden ballot dump, where there were like a few 100,000 votes that just suddenly came in. And in one of the states, they were all for Biden, okay, which is statistically impossible. And in the other state, they were mostly for Biden. They just appeared out of nowhere. Now, 16 years ago, my allies and I would have noticed that kind of thing immediately. It happened in 2000, it happened in 2004. It happened in many Senate races and some House races. It's always very suspicious when that happens. That was the first sign of it. There are also literally hundreds of affidavits from people on the ground, and that's legal evidence. A sworn affidavit is legal evidence. And some of these people were Democrats, very principled Democrats, like in Detroit, who witnessed with their own eyes, election workers faking ballots. And there are several videos, you can see it yourself, of these workers with stacks of blank ballots busily filling them out. It's unbelievable. It's so open. And as an example of one of the really shocking things that anyone interested in election integrity should have jumped on immediately, this is not that long ago, a few months ago, in a county in Florida, I think it was Florida, I'm sorry, it was in Georgia, a guy named Jovan Pulitzer, he holds many patents. He's an expert in, detecting fraud, studying documents. He has the technology to actually tell if a ballot has been folded, which is a sign that it's been tampered with, okay? And he testified before a subcommittee in this Fulton County, Georgia, and persuaded them. I mean, his expertise was so impressive, and his method of detecting fraud so surefire that the subcommittee voted to have all the ballots in that county subjected to his scrutiny. And what happened? The night after the vote, a truck pulled up to the warehouse where the ballots were stored, and they were all shredded. Oh, seriously?
Really?
Yeah, I'm not making that up. I continue to follow Pulitzer on Twitter. I mean, he strikes me as another principled person. I mean, he doesn't care what party it is. Like you, I really haven't had time to focus on it as I used to do. By about 2009, I was so tired of trying to, break through that brick wall. Every time you tried to bring up the issue, you'd be called a conspiracy theorist. And I said, someday this is going to be a disaster because of this. And I actually think it's happened now. But I'm going to get back into it, I think, and try to write an essay on just an overview of what happened this last time, and maybe use it as a new introduction to my book and have the book come out again, because I think Republicans will now be interested in this issue in a way they were not when their side won, I really don't care whether they're right or left. We need a plurality of Americans to demand some very easy, fundamental reforms. No more electronic vote counting. That should be illegal. All votes should be, cast on paper ballots, counted in the open, the old-fashioned way, like they still do all over the world. There should be no private companies involved in the process. Everybody should be automatically registered on his or her 18th birthday. So just get out of this mare's nest of state regulations, demanding all these documents. Election day should be a federal holiday. I mean, there's just a bunch of things that we should do to give some, validity to the election system, because right now it's embarrassing, and it means that we don't really live in a democracy.
And
serious problem.
And I think this will segue nicely into your situation at NYU, in that you and I are having this conversation, and for me, it's a really normal thing to have a difficult conversation, sometimes about subjects that I'm not too sure of. So I do more listening and asking questions than anything.
Yeah.
But at no point in this, conversation, and am I like, we got to shut this guy Mark up. I mean, this guy's got to be, muzzle this dude right now. And that's something that, part of it, I credit to a few really great professors that I had at NYU. And I had this great class, and I think I mentioned it in the email I wrote to you. I had a class called Belief and Skepticism, and it was with Professor Mark Cohen. And I think it was the very first class, the first day, he asked us to split up into two groups: the believers and the skeptics. And even though I had seen myself as a skeptic, I had gone to Catholic school, but I came out an atheist. In that class, I was like, wait a minute, are there things that I actually believe? So I'd have to be a believer. So, all right, I'm going to be on the believer side. And he wanted us to bring up a topic, and we were going to debate, the two sides. So I raised my hand, and the thing that I said as a believer, I said, rape is wrong. And now the skeptics on the other side of the classroom had to defend rape.
Oh my God.
I mean, talk about being put in a lousy position, but it was I guess a fiery, interesting, 45 minutes, 50, I think it was a 50-minute class. And that was something where it was sort of like, man, there's no topic that we can't talk about. There's nothing that, especially in an academic setting, that we can't talk about. And when I was in college, I was there my sophomore years when I was there during 9/11, and it was something that I look back on, and I realized, since then I've had many friends who were quote unquote 9/11 truthers, and good people that I know, who were a part of that movement. And I was just thinking, I was like, man, when I look at the body count of these 9/11 truther conspiracy theorists compared to the people who had us invade Iraq, there's no comparison whatsoever. So let's demonize the 9/11 truther conspiracy theorists. They're idiots. They're dumb. Let's just shut them up.
Yeah.
But then we look at the people that we look to for the truth. We look to for guidance. As you say, like George Bush at that time was sort of elevated to this almost messianic stature.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, look at all the harm that came out of that.
Yeah, really. Well, whenever all the media is united, well, when they're united on anything, it's suspicious, because that kind of unanimity doesn't happen by accident. But when they're united in ridiculing somebody, calling or some notion, they're screaming that it's a hoax, it's fake, it's been debunked. They keep saying that. where there's smoke, there's fire. Why would they be doing that if there were nothing to it? Why don't they just ignore it? When somebody calls you a conspiracy theorist, they have lost the argument, because, as I just explained, it is a slur intended to shut down discussion. See, if they really had an argument, they wouldn't ridicule you and they wouldn't call you names. But most of the so-called fact checks that we read in the media, you take out the snideness, the derision, and the name calling, and then just look closely at what it is they're looking at in order to disprove a given claim. And like when it comes to these COVID vaccines, the fact checkers will always basically refer back to the manufacturers of the vaccines as the authority on whether they're safe or not, or maybe the Gates Foundation. But these are interested parties. That is not debunking something, okay? But the media has become a gigantic machine for discouraging, legitimate inquiry, and for stigmatizing people who raise questions. Whereas you learned in that class, you got to raise questions. I mean, if you don't raise questions, you're just a lemming. You're just you don't deserve the freedoms that we enjoy, really. Because
and also, I think it's incumbent upon the people to have answers to those questions. To be able to say like, oh yeah, no, but that's been brought up a bunch of times. This is the reasoning that that we have for it. What else do you got? There has to be a, there has to be some communication there.
well, yeah.
And so the class that you teach, or one of the classes that you teach on propaganda. So how about so I do comedy, and a lot of it is political comedy, and I can't tell you the amount of sketches that I put out there, sketch comedy videos that take on a political subject, and the amount of times that I've been called a propagandist, or like,
Yeah.
you're doing propaganda. The thing is, am I doing it? I'm not sure. Like, so maybe
What do they mean when they say that?
What do they mean? I guess let's see if I guess example would be, I made a video a little while back called "Burglars for Gun Control."
Mm-hmm.
So it was it was basically what the title is. A couple of guys are trying to break into a home. There was a single mom with her baby, and she fired upon them and shot one of the guys. And the whole conceit is that we play off these burglars as if these are guys just going out doing their job, and they and they came across this crazy madman, with a deranged madman with a gun. And that one was definitely a big hit with a lot of Second Amendment people and all that. But the amount of people were like, oh, this is just like your pro-gun propaganda and all that.
Well, yeah, what I can say to that? I mean,
Sure.
yeah, it is. It's definitely that. But if it were the other way around, and you were goofing on the other side, the people attacking you as a propagandist wouldn't have any problem with it.
Sure.
They wouldn't think it was propaganda.
Sure.
Because see, that's the thing about this is what I say the first day of class, that it's hard to study. First of all, I don't treat it as an academic subject, as something remote, where we focus only on like the Nazis and the Bolsheviks, maybe World War I. No, it's not an academic subject. It is a crucial subject that everybody's got to study. I think it should be taught in high schools and colleges, part of the curriculum, how propaganda works. And the hard part of it is that precisely this, that we just discussed, that anyone is able to point to an example of it that they don't like, right? But they can't see it at all for what it is if it pushes their buttons and they agree with it. So while it's, very easy for us to, score points against, say, Fox News if we're liberals, or the New York Times if we're conservatives, the hard part is to kind of pull back and try to take a thorough and impartial look at propaganda generally, and be prepared to move out of your comfort zone and maybe reconsider some beliefs that you've held, often fervently, often for a long time. This makes it hard, I tell the students, if you really try to do this, you might get upset. You might get mad. Okay. If I mention in this class, if I mention evidence of a counter narrative that really pisses you off, you think is outlandish, do me and yourself a favor, just look into it. That's all I ask. Look into it. If I'm wrong, come to class and tell me, because an argument in class is really an excellent thing. And if I'm right, then you've learned something, right? Mm-hmm. So the purpose of the class, I make abundantly clear, is while we're going to study the background, we're going to look at the Nazis, we're going to look at all that, the history of modern propaganda. It's very important to understand it. Our main concern ultimately is being able to perceive it in real time, or at least perceive a very recent propaganda. It's got to be something the students remember, because it's the propaganda in the air right now that's most destructive, which is not to say it's always inaccurate. I mean, propaganda drives to get you to wear your seatbelt. That's propaganda too. It's not false and it's not malevolent, but we're concerned with propaganda that disguises itself as something else and that is driven. What is propaganda? All it is really is any organized attempt to get large numbers of people to do something or think something. It's really all it is. So I warn them, not only might you yourself be a little freaked out sometimes, but believe me, once you start to study these things in depth, like we spent a week on the Kennedy assassination, I have them read some books that are incredibly compelling and kind of definitive. You're gonna tell your roommates or your friends, your family, I've studied this, I've learned that, and often you're going to get some pushback. They're going to say, what are you talking about? It makes people angry because, propaganda, it's not a rational thing. It hits us at a very deep level. It's not like persuasion. If I'm trying to persuade you of something, or there's a group of us trying to persuade each other, it's an argument we're having with each other. It's a back and forth. It's a give and take. And we're using arguments. We're using our reason. We're trying to use logic. We're trying to use examples. That's very different from the way propaganda works. Because propaganda does not want an argument. Propaganda does not want to be contradicted. Propaganda wants nothing anywhere near it that throws it into question. So if you're, let's take commercial propaganda, advertising. You buy, pages in the New York Times. You do not want the Times to be running any articles that cast any kind of a shadow on your product, right? So they run tons of big pharma advertising, as all the media do. You're not going to find any truth in those media about the vaccines or even certain lethal drugs. It took forever to get Vioxx off the market, even though it was killing people all over the place, because the media does not make an issue out of things that affect their advertisers. But that's just one example. Even political propaganda is the same thing. No argument. This is why propaganda and censorship are two sides of the same coin, you see? If you want your propaganda to triumph, if you want it to fill everybody's heart and mind, right? It's got to be the only thing people encounter. It's got to be the only thing they can find from the usual array of media outlets that they favor. It's got to be the first thing that they see when they do a Google search, okay? Those algorithms are very propagandistic. Google owns 2 pharmaceutical companies, okay? You do a search on some issue having to do with vaccines or, prescription drugs, the first thing that's going to come up is stuff attacking people raising questions about it. You just can't find the questions themselves, right? So it's hard, it's difficult, it wants to be everywhere. So you got to figure out how to find the other side of the story. And Lou, that is harder than ever now, because cyberspace, social media are being policed on a daily basis. People being deplatformed on a daily basis. YouTube channels taken down after years.
Yeah, part of me is wondering, when this goes up, and thankfully I haven't had any videos taken down off of YouTube. I've had some stuff that isn't, monetized and all that, but yeah, I'm like, man, we might be running a risk of this just being pulled just because of some of the things that we're touching upon.
Well, you might want to end the show right now. Well,
I had to end it at the beginning. That's
yeah,
it.
yeah, true. It's
But
too late now. Yeah, YouTube, which is owned by Google, is really relentless. And Facebook is getting worse and worse, and Twitter as well. You know, look, these are supposed to be our commons. Okay, this is where we all meet to discuss things. And yeah, they're privately owned, but there is a precedent for demanding that privately owned commonses not interfere, there be no interference with free speech there. There's a famous Supreme Court case, Pruneyard versus something, I forget the name of the other party, but it had to do with a shopping mall in California where some kids were handing out leaflets. I forget the issue. They had a table set up and the owners of the mall made them stop. And the kids sued on First Amendment grounds. And under the California state constitution, the students actually prevailed, okay, which is interesting. And then this ended up at the Supreme Court over the question of whether the California Supreme Court or whether any state Supreme Court has the right to do that, has the right to say that the owners of private properties that function as a commons must not interfere with free speech in that space. And the Supreme Court found for California, which is to say that those, I think there's maybe 12 states where you cannot interfere with free speech in a shopping mall. Now, you know, I'm wondering to what extent is that applicable to Twitter or to Facebook, which we use as a commons, and where I've been shadow banned, you know, long since. You know, Wikipedia has been, you know, turned into a propaganda weapon. At a certain point last year, my biography was just completely rewritten, and it became very, very snide. And you know, I'm a conspiracy theorist and all this. So, you know, free speech in this country and in the West generally is really at serious risk for a number of reasons, and that too relates to my case at NYU.
Yeah, let's get into that, because your classroom is not the commons. It's, you know, your classroom, it's between you and your students, and you're, you know, representing a university. And yeah, maybe we can talk about what got you in trouble.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, well, I've been teaching this propaganda course for about 20 years, and I already told you that I make clear to them how we approach the subject. I also say, I just want to add something I say throughout the semester. You know, when I mention evidence of some outlandish seeming counter narrative, bear this in mind always. Do not believe a single word I say. I say this throughout the semester. Don't believe me. Don't go and tell your roommate, my professor said this. I'm not an oracle, okay? I'm fallible. All I've done is research, and I'll tell you what the research tells me, but don't believe me. Check it out yourself. Okay, that's very important. All right, so this last September, I'm teaching the class as usual, except for one big difference, which if you thought about it for 10 seconds, you could figure out. We weren't meeting in the same place, okay? We were meeting by Zoom. So I'm making the point that, you know, it's important for us to pay attention to propaganda drives ongoing at the time. And I said, look at how we're meeting, right? Look at how unnatural this is. You hate this, I hate this. Why are we doing it? Why aren't we in the same place? Well, obviously, it's because of the COVID crisis. And the COVID crisis has been driven by a kind of a cluster of propaganda themes that we've been hearing all year. And that doesn't mean they're necessarily false, but they are propaganda. They are one-sided. So, you know, we could actually examine any aspect of the COVID crisis, or you could write your papers on an aspect of the COVID crisis. One thing one could do, and this, Lou, was completely hypothetical. I'd just been working on this, so I was interested in it. We could look at the mask mandates, at masking. It may interest you to know that all the randomized controlled trials conducted of masking in hospitals, that's the most rigorous kind of scientific study. I thought there were 8. There were actually 10 at that moment. Now, by now there were 11. But I said all of those 8 studies have found over the years that masks are not effective barriers against respiratory virus. That's the scientific consensus. And that's the consensus that Dr. Fauci was echoing until April. He was even on 60 Minutes saying masks won't do any good. The CDC as well until early April. The World Health Organization echoed that consensus until June. Then they flipped. But the fact is, that's the consensus of those studies. I would encourage you to read those. And I would also encourage you to read the more recent studies finding that masks are effective. So you would read all the literature, okay, and come to your own conclusion as to which side makes a more compelling case. Now, you're not scientists, neither am I. So what are a few things that you can do as a layman? What are a few things you can do as a student of propaganda to try to figure out whether what you're reading is sound or not? Well, one thing you can do with a new study very often is read the scientific reviews, because often there are comments on a new study and scientists will weigh in with criticisms, because real science is based on, serious attempts to take a theory down. That's how you test it. Other scientists really go at it tooth and claw. The other thing you should do is when you see a study that says masks absolutely work, see what university the study comes from, and then check to see if that if that school has any financial arrangements with Big Pharma or the Gates Foundation, because then there might be confirmation bias, right? There might be a conflict of interest. That was the advice I gave them. So, we talked about other things and then the class ended. And the following week, I get an email from this student, a Gallatin student, who asked to join the class late, which happens all the time. And I said, sure. I said, some of my best students are from Gallatin, so welcome. So she joins the class. And the first day she spoke up at one point, and it might be relevant to tell you what she said, but we'll return to that if you're interested. The second day we were there. Now, let me just add one thing about the first week's class. I had recommended to them as a shortcut to finding 7 of the 8 studies I was referring to, a certain paper that was put together by a Canadian scientist named Denis Rancourt. It had the title Masks Don't Work. But regardless of his take on it, it was convenient because it has in it the links to the 7 of the 8 studies. So I said, for convenience sake, you can go to his paper. So in the second class that was now attended by this new student, another student started to attack Rancourt and his paper, making points that I recognized. I said, did you happen to read the column about this in Psychology Today? And he said, yes. I said, did you actually read the studies? And he kind of mumbled, he hadn't read them. He read the paper attacking them. And this, was the first thing that came up when he did a Google search on the guy. This is the point I was making before. So we had a back and forth about this with this student. And I used this as a kind of lesson. I said, if you jump to Google and take as authoritative the first thing that comes up, because maybe you don't like what you're reading. And indeed, he did not like hearing that masks don't work. So he quickly went to Google and he grabbed that thing, right? Because propaganda, that we agree with, we don't really see as propaganda. So he read this really, terrible hit piece. And, it's full of misrepresentations, and the guy's got an axe to grind, and it's ad hominem, and it's all this stuff. We were talking about it in the class. So this other student who just joined is very silent. This is a Thursday. She didn't say a word. The next thing I know, I think it's like a Monday, the next Monday, and I get a call from my department chair asking me if I had discouraged my students from wearing masks. And I said, no, I certainly didn't. In fact, I had said to them, I am not telling you not to wear masks. This is not about your behavior. There's a rule, follow the rule. This is an intellectual exercise. I made that very clear. I said, but I did recommend that they read these randomized controlled studies, among others. And he said something to me like, do you think you know more than the doctors at NYU? Which I didn't even know what to say to that. I mean, I read the studies, I can read English. I don't know what the doctor knows or what you're talking about. At any rate, he was a little miffed at me. And he said, well, I have to report this to the COVID, Gestapo, whatever they're called at NYU.
I had a feeling you were going to say Gestapo.
Well, I couldn't help it. So I said, go ahead, whatever. And I went, I think it was he who told me the student was on Twitter complaining about the class. I think that was the first I heard of it. It was that day. And I went online, and sure enough, there's this student, the one who joined the class, demanding that NYU fire me for putting the students at risk. And it wasn't just one. There were like, 15 hitting me in one way or another. And a lot of screenshots from my website, which is called News from Underground, which again, the purpose of that website is to, make available to people important information that they're not hearing from the media. Maybe it comes from the foreign press, maybe it comes from the local media, maybe it's from a citizen journalist. I have a listserv, though, that if anyone wants to join it, they can just go to that website and sign. It's markcrispinmiller.com, okay? markcrispinmiller.com. And you can get my emails every day. They all end up on the website. And if you don't want to be bombarded with my emails and your inbox filling up with them, you choose the daily digest option and you get just one a day. And it's got all that day's email. All right, so she went to my website. She takes screenshots of these things and puts them up on Twitter as if they're self-evidently false, and says all of his sources are far right and conspiracy websites, okay? None of them are far right. Some of them could be defined as conspiracy, except they're all well sourced, they're all responsibly edited. In her eyes, they were completely unacceptable, but she's demanding that I be fired, all right? Okay, now, about that. That's never happened to me before. It wasn't pleasant. I mean, I wish she had just raised her objections in class. It would have been good for her and everybody else, but she flipped out instead. All right, that's her First Amendment right. But what I did not accept and what I don't accept is what happened next. And that is that my department chair tweeted his thanks to her and wrote, "We as a department have made this a priority and are discussing next steps."
He wrote that on Twitter?
Yes, he wrote that on Twitter. I was as astonished as, well, I was more astonished than you. I've been in that department for 24 years and he's speaking for the department. That's odd because I wasn't included in any of these discussions and nobody asked me anything about this. Here's this young woman who, let me add, made stuff up, because there's another tweet of hers. It says that I had been bombarding her with emails, trying to badger her into agreeing with my view of masking. And if she didn't, she would be a dupe of the media. This is fantasy. The only emails I ever exchanged with her had to do with her joining the class. That was it. So this is not a reliable witness, but they just assumed she was right. I was guilty as charged. And they, told the chair, thank her, right? I couldn't believe it. So I called him. I said, what are you doing tweeting your thanks to the student and assuring her that my firing is a priority for the department? And he got kind of flustered and he hedged and he said, no, I didn't mean that. I just wanted her to feel that she'd been heard.
Ugh.
I said, well, it doesn't, you could have just said, thank you for your opinion. It doesn't read like that. I would like you to take that down. He got mad at me and he left it up until just like last month. Well, plenty more happened. It gets much better.
Mark, can I just, what you're describing, like there are so many elements of it that just scream, we are in the year 2021. And it's actually been for the past 5 years or so. This idea of, I want her to know that she's been heard, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, Mike, just saying that, the idea of this person can have a very strong disagreement with you And her
Right.
first move is you have to lose your job.
Yeah, right.
Your livelihood has to be destroyed. And then on top of that, like you said, like self-evident, like, oh, this is, look at this is wrong, this is wrong. And then because you are a, part of my language, a piece of shit, you can be lied about as well.
Right.
So they can put all that in. And it is so frustrating to be living in a culture where that is acceptable, or at least some people in the culture who should know better are accepting that.
Well, yeah.
It's
Amen.
it's
You're
insane.
talking about cancel culture, and that's
Insane.
that's one of the cudgels that has been used against me. The idea here is, I'm basically repeating what you said. They see me as this overbearing, older white male, and she's automatically sympathetic because she's a young woman, right?
Mhm.
And whatever I have to say is suspect. Anyway, let me just continue with the narrative, because
Sure.
just the facts of the story are so amazing. So that happens. My chair puts up a formal public thanks to this student for her demand that NYU fire me. The next day, a couple of my students notified me to tell me that they had received an email from this doctor who, I guess he's the head of the NYU COVID Gestapo. He wrote them an email co-signed by the dean of the school I teach in, Steinhardt, starting out by saying they believe in academic freedom, which I've learned, when you hear somebody say that, you better hit the deck, because they're about to come out with a big but, right? So this email, which didn't even have me on copy, to the students in my class, tells them that I had given them dangerous misinformation, includes a list of links to the CDC's website saying that these are the studies you should believe, and ending by warning them to wear their masks on campus, as if I had told them not to. And as if I had not also told them to read those same studies. The difference between what I did and what they did is that I never tell my students what to believe. The whole purpose of the class is to encourage them to make up their own minds. And these two bureaucrats stepped into my shoes without even telling me, took over my podium and said, you believe this, okay? It's like training for compliance, the opposite of what I do. That was the second thing that happened. And then the third thing was all the same week, late September, my chair tells me that for the good of the department, I should cancel the propaganda course for this semester. I was scheduled to teach it this semester. I said, what do you mean for the good of the department? And he says, well, your film course is very popular. So if you teach 2 sections of that instead of 1, and the propaganda course will have these really high numbers, and that'll be good for us. And I said, well, the only problem I have with that argument is that both classes are the same size. They both take 24 students and they're both always full. So that doesn't sound like a real reason. That sounds like a pretext. But since you're the chair and that's what you want me to do, I have no choice. But I am doing this under protest, okay? Now, those are the 3 things that happened. It stuck in my craw. I couldn't swallow it. So with the help of some friends, I wrote this petition that's up at change.org. All it does, very simple, all it asks for is that NYU respect my academic freedom and set a good example for other schools. But I did it in the name of all professors, all journalists, all doctors, all scientists, all whistleblowers, all activists who've been gagged or punished for their dissidence, certainly over the last year, where it's reached kind of crisis point, but really for decades. It's been going on for a very long time. So it was kind of representing my struggle here as a flashpoint in a larger struggle for free speech, okay? I put the petition up. Thousands of people start signing it. Some very eminent people sign it, okay? And it's very gratifying. A month later, this is like October 21st, its story was about to take an even worse turn. I get an email from my dean. I've never met this guy. He's never contacted me, or he had never contacted me. And he says, I'm ordering a review of your conduct at the insistence of your colleagues who made this demand in the attached letter. Okay, I read the letter. The letter starts out, okay, it starts out by saying we believe in academic freedom. Okay, that was the beginning. And they go on to say that though they believe in academic freedom, as the faculty handbook notes, if a colleague's behavior is sufficiently egregious, it can nullify his academic freedom. So the implication was very clear that my conduct was so heinous that I should probably be fired or disciplined in some way. Now, why? Well, first of all, they said I discouraged my students from wearing masks. It was the first claim, completely false. And secondly, I had intimidated students who were wearing masks, which was a pretty remarkable observation considering the fact that the class is on Zoom and you don't wear a mask on Zoom.
Unless you're the president.
Like, right. Yeah, well, he could learn a few things from me, but yeah. I don't want him in my class. Anyway, yeah. But that was only a takeoff point because now this is gonna sound familiar to you, some of this language. They accused me of explicit hate speech, and I'm quoting, explicit hate speech, mounting attacks on students and others in our community, advocating for an unsafe learning environment, assailing my students with non-evidence-based theories, microaggressions and aggressions. I think I've covered it. It was every sin in the social justice playbook they accused me of, with no examples, with no evidence. And I was staggered by this. Now, I didn't know what to do. I asked the provost for advice. She's pretty rational. She said, well, you should meet with the dean. So we had this bizarre meeting on Zoom where I started out by telling him there's nothing to this. It's all lies or delusions. Why are you ordering a review? You didn't even talk to me. I'd never met him before. And he seemed very out of it, He's new to the position. And he said, well, we had to do it because the university's lawyers told us we have to do it, which is very significant. We'll return to that. I asked him how long it would take. He said till the end of the semester, mid-December. I said, what will it entail? He said, well, we'll talk to people. It was just really very vague. And I said, well, if you're going to talk to students, I'm going to have students write in my defense. He said, okay. So well over 50 have written. I mean, the letters are great. They're the only gratifying thing in this whole horrible experience. And I'll just say, to bring you up to date on that as far as I know, the review, if any, is still going on because I never heard anything. And nobody I know has ever said they heard from anybody. So I don't even think there is a review. And I'll explain what I think is going on after I tell you what I did next, okay? Let's just go back to late October. I went through this letter point by point, and I wrote a rebuttal, very careful. I demonstrated every claim they made was false. And I asked for a retraction and an apology. I sent it to them. I heard nothing back. I waited a week, 10 days. I sent it again. I said, please, by November 20th, I'd like you to retract this and apologize. Nothing, crickets. My whole experience here has been silence from above, right? So what was I supposed to do? Am I going to let them get away with this? It was having an effect on my health. It was certainly intended to hurt my reputation. Indeed, it was intended to impoverish me by having me fired and evicted. So I decided I had no choice but to sue them for libel. 25 of my department colleagues signed it out of like 33. 6 of those people are junior faculty who, I don't know what's up with them. I'm not suing them. I'm suing the other 19, okay? And they flipped out, and then they got a lawyer, and very briefly, they filed a motion to dismiss. the exhibits they submitted are well worth reading. They think these exhibits prove that they were not lying about me. Most of them are their own email exchanges about me over the years. I had no idea I was the object of this obsessive, malicious attention for at least 4 years. And that's their evidence that I'm this scumbag, you know. All these documents are up on my website, by the way, everything. So they filed this motion to dismiss. We responded with a brief and my own affidavit, which I would like people to read. And then the other side replied. That's the process. That's as far as it goes. So as of now, as we speak, at any moment, the judge could rule. It's been several months. He could grant their motion to dismiss, in which case we will appeal. He could deny their motion to dismiss, in which case we'll proceed. I am raising money for this because I expect this to be a costly process, as we're going to depose these people. I believe NYU is involved, you know, from behind the scenes. I don't know that, but I think that's what we'll discover. So there's a GoFundMe page that people can go to. Just do a search on GoFundMe and libel and my name. The money goes right into an escrow account that my lawyer manages, so I'm not profiting from this. I'm trying to raise $100,000. I've raised over 80. I expect I'll need more than that, but I'm not going to give up. This is outrageous, and it speaks to your initial point that we're living at a time when this kind of thing is routine, okay? Mm-hmm. And the thing about my case that's remarkable, and there's many things about it that are remarkable, but the thing that's most significant, I think, is that I've been hit with all three of what are now the most commonplace weapons used to shut people up. So I call it the censorship trifecta, okay? First of all, they accuse me of conspiracy theory, okay? And we talked about that earlier. They say I assail my students with non-evidence-based theories. That's just another way of saying conspiracy theories. And that's been around since the 60s. I've been called that since 2005. That's very familiar. On top of that, as we discussed, they also went after me with cancel culture methods, right? Hate speech, accuse me of hate speech, maintaining an unsafe learning environment, which I think means challenging students' beliefs. That's now like a crime. It'll hurt their little feelings, you know. And the third one, which has been especially widespread since last January 2020, is misinformation about COVID or vaccines that's doing people harm. So this dangerous misinformation that has lately moved Chelsea Clinton to publicly demand a global crackdown on social media sites to wipe out misinformation about COVID, okay? We're talking about a totalitarian crackdown here that uses all three of those methods, you know? The woke ideology, you know, the kind of BLM, critical race theory, all that stuff is working very harmoniously with the kind of big pharma connected health police. So the combination of those forces spells really bad news for the First Amendment, you know, which you may have heard Prince Harry the other day called bonkers.
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 Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Harry.
I've been waiting for him to weigh in on our First Amendment.
Yeah. Well, but, see, that's a sign of the times, you know. Yeah. I mean, it's the same with Biden saying no amendment is absolute. When he was talking about the Second Amendment, I think he's wrong about the Second Amendment. And I certainly think he's wrong about the First Amendment, and he's wrong about the Fourth Amendment. Yeah. You know, it's very scary language. And this is coming from Democrats, you know, who are supposed to be anti-authoritarian. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah. So one of the questions that I've been having is that I wanted to ask you about was recently the CDC said, hey, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. Right. And people are losing their shit over it. They're going absolutely nuts. And I was on a podcast the other day and we were talking about it. And it's like, you know, for say a year or so, people have had their, they're tribal markings.
Yeah.
We know which side you're on. You're wearing a mask. If you're outside wearing a mask, we know what side you're on. If you're jogging around, we know what side you're on. If you're on a beach alone, staring at the ocean, and there's no one around you, and you're wearing a mask, we know which side you're on. And now this completely upends it.
Yeah.
And there are people, I've seen people say, I'm vaccinated, but I'm going to continue to wear my mask because I don't want anyone to think I'm a conservative.
Seriously?
Yeah, people have, yeah.
Well, it has been rigidly politicized from the beginning,
Yeah.
In a way that just drives me nuts. I mean, in a way that's killed people, okay? That's not hyperbole. Hydroxychloroquine used early is a lifesaver, okay? That's a fact. It's a clinically and scientifically proven fact. So all it took for everybody on one side of the divide, and the most educated, by the way, all it took for them not to believe that hydroxychloroquine works was for Trump to tout the drug. So as soon as he touts it, and Dr. Fauci's in the background doing this, right? Every dim bulb liberal out there thinks, well, yeah, this is ridiculous. It's obviously poisonous. People shouldn't take it. And then everybody on the right believes it. And that's good that they believed it, but they shouldn't just believe it because Trump said it. It just works. So, the reason why Trump functioned so well to help polarize people over the issue is that it helped promote the notion that early remedy for COVID was illegitimate. And the same applies to ivermectin, which is even better than hydroxychloroquine, okay? The point is, Lou, there are remedies that save people's lives. They don't have to go to the hospital. Why did they have to be blacked out? Why all those big lies about those drugs? Because they interfered with the rollout of the vaccine program. There's no need for these vaccines if people can just get access to those drugs. This is elementary. And it's giving a big problem to the lockdown enthusiasts and big pharma soldiers that India's death rate has been plummeting since they started using ivermectin over there, okay? So they were all set to turn, India into the latest scare story, with all this hyped up imagery of people dying in the aisles of hospitals, sometimes recycling footage from previous years, other situations. They legalized ivermectin over there. People are taking it and it works like a charm. They're doing quite well. So, don't even get me started. This propaganda drive has really, really endangered, mental health in general and people's cognitive abilities in particular, because, people with college degrees are saying the most scientifically illiterate things because they get all their information from the press, which gets all its information from, liars like Dr. Fauci and Bill Gates, who have a vested interest in the outcome. So anyway.
And what about, one of the really big turnarounds was, I don't know how many months you have to go back to when, people were saying, oh, you know what? It looks like the virus was made in a lab. And those people were complete. You're a nut job. There's absolutely no, you are not welcome in polite society. Get out of here with that, that science fiction, that anti-Chinese, blah, blah, blah. Right. And now people are coming around and saying like, oh yeah, it might actually have been made in a lab. Well, and it's so, and it's so difficult. It's difficult for a layperson like myself, where I'm a new dad. I have a family. I have loved ones, and I also love my friends and my community. And I loved my city at one point, but I'm no longer in. And I just want to know what's the truth so I could live the healthiest life I can live and take care of the people I love. Yeah. And people are just pulling us apart,
I hear you. I totally hear you. It's a real serious problem to have a media system as utterly corrupt as we have, just as we have a voting system that's as utterly corrupt as ours. And we have a medical establishment that is really deeply corrupted by big pharma money and by Gates in particular, who pretty much owns the World Health Organization. I don't know if people know this. I am an absolutely fanatical believer in free speech and the First Amendment, and as such, I don't think anything is off the table. You know, and everything should be open for discussion. You know, everything, because you don't just take things on faith, right? You examine them yourself. So, you know, News from Underground, it's just me, but I try to provide people with as much information as possible on very important issues. If I send something out that's faulty or wrong, people will let me know. I'll send out a correction immediately. I'll send out arguments against that. That's how truth emerges. That's how the scientific process works, through the clash of opinions and different sets of data, you know, different kinds of studies and experiments, experiences. So, you know, if we had a properly functioning democracy, this COVID crisis from the beginning would have been handled so efficiently and democratically that it wouldn't have become anything like the disaster it became, because from the beginning, every claim, every directive, every policy would be subjected to open public procedures where experts on several sides of the issue would testify and answer questions, you know, put to them by legislators. That never happened from the beginning. It's been top down. It's like Cuomo, you know, issues this directive. All these businesses closed. There was never any need for that. All these people, you know, skulking around the streets with masks on, little children wearing masks, you know, that just makes me want to cry. That's completely unnecessary, because children have strong natural immunity to COVID-19. They don't get it and they don't transmit it. But if you put a mask on them all day long, you are endangering their health. You are depriving them of oxygen, okay? You're also stunting them socially, because you learn how to, you know, relate to others through facial expressions. You know, it's traumatizing for them to see all these eyes masked up, you know, from lower lids to neck. It's grotesque. It's like sadistic. It's just wrong, you know? The city that I love and that you left and loved, not the same city anymore, you know? I don't really recognize it. I don't recognize these people as New Yorkers, you know? It's kind of an authoritarian plague that's taken over the city. And, you know, I, for one, am just not going to take it. And we have to speak up. And we have to study these vaccines because they are extremely dangerous, and they're not even vaccines at all. I mean, they work in a different way. But we've been so, you know, barraged with disinformation, you know, by our favorite media usually, that we really don't know what's up. And people have made decisions based either on panic or on a desperate desire to be able to go back to the world we used to know. You know, they want to be able to fly somewhere and see a loved one. So I'll get the shot, you know. It's not a good idea. If you've had one, I don't think you should get the second one. If you've had two, absolutely do not get a third one. You know, all the stuff about boosters is just based on a big lie, you know. And I'm not, you know, I'm a media studies professor. I'm not a virologist, but I am one who has corresponded with dissident virologists, who has shared interviews with a lot of people all over the world. I will recommend a couple of people to you in your audience. This guy, Dr. Mike Yeadon, Y-E-A-D-O-N. This guy was for years a vice president at Pfizer. He was Pfizer's chief science officer. He has his own company. He is a believer in vaccines, okay? You have got to watch some interviews with this guy. He's been banned from social media. You know, the media blacks him out, but you can get hold of interviews with him. He has a lot of truth to tell about how dangerous these vaccines are. He believes, he's decided, he can come to no conclusion other than the thought that this is a deliberate depopulation effort, okay? He's very convincing. Another guy you should check out is a very famous microbiologist named Sukharit Bhakti. That's S-U-C-H-A-R-I-T, last name B as in boy, H-A-K-D-I. There's some terrific interviews with him. You know, and they're not the only ones, but they're the most articulate ones. And nobody can call them an anti-vaxxer or any of that stuff. That's not what this is about. You know, they believe in certain vaccinations. There are also some, pretty pro-vax guys who have made millions off vaccines who are very uneasy about these inoculations because they were rushed through. The Moderna vaccine was not even animal tested at all. They were hustled to market in months. It usually takes years to test these things, and they don't work the way any previous vaccine has worked, okay? Vaccines work by, injecting you with a live or dead or attenuated version of a virus, so that your system develops antibodies against it, and then you're immune. That's the first vaccine was for smallpox. This is Edward Jenner, okay? And the word vaccine comes from the Latin word for cow, because he used a kind of cowpox to inoculate people against that disease, okay? That's the way all vaccines have worked, for all the other illnesses, measles, et cetera. Some of those vaccines are very problematic too for other reasons, but these don't work that way, okay? They've never managed to isolate this virus, the coronavirus, for weird, I don't know why, it's very strange, but nobody has a completely isolated version. So they haven't been able to come up with a weak or live or attenuated version of that. Can't do it. So they kind of put together an artificial version of it, using some of the proteins from that virus. So it's like an artificial spike protein that they inject into your system in the hopes that it will stimulate an autoimmune response, not to prevent you from getting the infection. People who've gotten this vaccine, they think I won't catch it. No, people who get the vaccine often catch it. It happens all the time because it does not protect against infection or transmission. All it is supposed to do is to ensure that when you get it, your symptoms will not be severe. That's the justification. But if you study the vaccine adverse event reporting system, that's VAERS, which is the database of reports by doctors that they've been adverse events after shots, okay? It's very hard to use. It's very user unfriendly. But if you can figure out how to dig down into the data, you discover that there have been thousands of deaths after these vaccinations in this country alone, and many, many more injuries. A lot of people getting weirdly sick after these shots. And only about 1% of those events end up being reported to the VAERS system. So the actual number of people who've suffered from this campaign is far greater than we know. And you have to go outside the media to get this truth, see? And then when I say things like this, I'll be called, conspiracy theorist, I'll be putting lives at risk and so on. No, I believe I'm saving lives, okay?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, you're scaring the shit out of me because I got the Pfizer one, and fortunately, at least at this point, the adverse effects, I had kind of a cold, like sort of after it. Thankfully, nothing more serious, but yeah, it's getting close to my bedtime, and I feel like my eyes are going to be open, staring up at the ceiling.
Did you just have the one shot?
Oh no, the two. I had the two. The second
one. You didn't have any bad reaction after either one?
Fortunately not. Yeah, fortunately.
Can I give you some medical advice?
Yeah.
I mean, because I don't want you to go to bed all scared.
All right.
There's a substance called Suramin, Suramin, that is actually an antidote to this, certainly to COVID and very likely to the spike protein problem. And the way you can get that is just to drink pine needle tea, okay? Pine needle tea.
Pine needle tea. Okay.
Yeah, drink a strong cup of that every day and you should be okay. Did your whole family get the shots?
Just me and my wife. Yeah.
Yeah, the kids don't need it.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. Please don't. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, he's only one. Yeah.
No. But they're trying to vaccinate children too, and it's like something on a Nazi Germany. I'm telling you. Do join my website, and my purpose is not to scare or depress anybody. My purpose is to inform people. That's why we have a First Amendment. That's why the first generation of framers and the Congress in 1792 passed the Post Office Act. The whole purpose of that act, the whole purpose of building, creating the finest network of postal roads in the world, it was all about getting people news. It was not about writing letters or sending junk mail. It was all about news. It was all about making it possible for newspapers in every state to be circulated to the people in other states. That's what it was all about. And it was based on a clash of viewpoints and opinions because they believed that an informed citizenry would be able to resist government tyranny. That was their belief. Now we have a media system that's inseparable from the government, right? It's like 5 multinational corporations own it all. They're very, very close to the FCC and all the other agencies. It's a kind of behemoth that is not interested in our welfare. We have to look out for ourselves. We have to get the truth for ourselves. One way or another, Lou, I will end up doing an online propaganda course for the public, okay? And I'll let people know through my list because there is a real appetite for this.
Sure.
People need to know how to get some truth, and that's their God-given right to know what's going on. And as citizens of a democracy, that's necessary. So, I understand that I can freak you out if you've not talked to me before, but it's good to know what's going on. It's good to get some truth. It's good to be armed with some truth and not to be intimidated when people call you names for doing it, accusing you of being nuts for not believing the official narrative. There's no reason to believe the official narrative. There's none.
Yeah. And Mark, I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me. And, as an alum of NYU, I'm really upset by what you're going through as a professor, because, talking to you, you're one of those professors that I wish I had back when I was there, because a few of the things that you get making my stomach feel weird, but I think that's important, especially for young people who, God, you're going to college because you need to have your beliefs tested. You need to be exposed to stuff. And I'm gonna share all of the links that you have to your change.org, to your GoFundMe, to your News from Underground. Okay. And I hope more people check out your stuff. And let's. I think whether it's at NYU or on your own platform, I'm happy that I know that you're going to be teaching. So
well, thanks a million, Lou, and thanks for having me on. And let's keep in touch. I mean, if you're on my list, you'll be kept apprised. Let me say one last thing. I was just attacked pretty viciously by as a hit piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is kind of like the New York Times of the academic.
I can only imagine, yeah.
And I knew this was going to be a hit piece. I agreed to be interviewed because the guy was going to write the piece anyway. And it was a condition of the interview that he give me the videos of our conversations, and they're now up on my website. So people can read this attack on me and then watch our conversations. And tomorrow I'll be putting up our email exchanges from the beginning. So this is actually going to be a very interesting demonstration of how a hit piece is put together, by cherry picking little things. And I don't believe in taking this stuff lying down. When you're attacked, you fight back, and you don't let them shut you up.
Thank you so much for watching and or listening to my podcast. If you'd like to support my work, please head over to thelouperez.locals.com and join the Lou Perez community. And another way to support me is by supporting my sponsors. Black Organic Cold Brew. Head over to www.blvckbrew.com. Use promo code LOU for free shipping. And if you're into CBD products, please check out palomaverdecbd.com. Use promo code LOU for 25% off purchases over $75. All right. Bye.